This is At Ease, the military podcast of Thomas Nelson Community College. I'm Gary Pounder. On this edition of the pod, we're going to revisit a very important subject for any service member, that being the topic of transition. In other words, how do you make that jump from a successful military career to an equally successful career in the civilian world? Well, luckily, there's no shortage of resources available to the transitioning military member and their family. Everything from the Transition Assistance Program on base to various services offered by public and private agencies, including a program from an organization that's been assisting the military community for more than 80 years. We'll have more on the USO's Pathfinder Transition Program in just a minute. But first, a question for the airmen and the Space Force guardians in the audience. Have you finished your associate degree from the Community College of the Air Force? You know it's important for your military career, and let's face it, the Air Force and the Space Force make it easy. Most of the credits, as you know, that you need for that associate degree come from basic training, tech school, and OJT. And that means the only thing left are those 5 general education classes you must complete with a civilian school. And that's where we come in here at Thomas Nelson. We're the newest member of the CCAF GEM program. That makes us a preferred provider of those general ed classes for airmen and guardians that may need to complete their CCAF. We've got a wide selection of classes, online delivery, and a tuition discount, no matter where you're stationed, either in the Air Force or the Space Force. Learn more about TNCC and the GEM program at tncc.edu/military/GEM. That's GEM. Finishing your CCAF? It's closer than you think. At Thomas Nelson, becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College. And once again, on this edition of At Ease, we're going to be talking about military transition. How do you make that successful leap from a military career to success in the civilian sector? And there are any number of programs and organizations out there to help you, but one that you may not think about, but one definitely worth checking out, is the USO Pathfinder Transition Program, run by the USO, an organization serving the U.S. military community now for more than 80 years. And the man that runs the Pathfinder program here in Hampton Roads is Dr. Bob Habib. Bob, again, we appreciate you making the trek through the tunnel to join us here in the studio and talk about the Pathfinder program here on the podcast.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for the invite. It's awesome to be part of this journey together, and we're looking forward just to continue collaboration and service to this community.
And we appreciate that. And we'll talk more about Pathfinder in a moment. The way I like to open every podcast is most of our guests have some kind of military background. You're no exception. You're an Army retiree. Tell us, if you will, in a few minutes here about your own military background and how your time in the Army kind of led you to where you are right now with the USO Pathfinder program.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So I started as an Army signal person, basically carrying a radio around the desert, and I was fortunate enough to be in a situation where my first deployment, there was an Army band that was performing at a local area of operations, and I happened to be able to sit in. I told them, hey, I was a drummer, and they said, can you play? I said, sure can. And I sat in with them, and the rest was history. They brought me on as on-the-job training for the rest of that deployment, came back home, eventually recertified and classified as an Army bandsman, and spent the majority of my career that way. And half of that career actually spent instructor here in Hampton Roads at Little Creek at the Armed Forces School of Music. So that sort of was the bulk of my military career, between the first half being very Army-like and the second half being more instructional admin-based, really preparing the next generation of soldiers. And that's sort of what's got me interested in education and furthermore.
Well, we got to ask you what it was like being a bandsman in the Army. We hear the critics every so often saying, the military's got too many bands and things like that. But if you ever listen to a military band or orchestra, without exception, they are truly a first-rate professional organization. They really do a fantastic job. And it's got to be exciting as a soldier or any military member to be able to travel, to go out to make contact with, your fellow military members, playing for military audiences and playing for civilian audiences as well.
Absolutely. The band program for all the military services provides something that's very unique, that is just a piece of home wherever people are in the world. And it was, I tell you, in the several deployments with Army bands that I made, being able to play, a rock concert for a group of soldiers or sailors that were like in the trenches, just muddy. I can recall a situation where they said, "Hey, tonight is our shower night for our unit," and we've asked them, "Would you rather listen to the rock band or take showers?" And they chose the rock band, and that's a lot of pressure, when you're doing that. But it just reminds me of how much people connect back home in ways. And so the military music program affords that opportunity not only for soldiers, but we basically serve as ambassadors of that sort of liaison approach between the military service and the public at large.
And, you mentioned that you were an instructor at the military music school over in Little Creek for a part of your career. I think something that many people don't realize is exactly how well trained, how well educated many military musicians are. For example, I know of a couple of military musicians right now that have their doctorates in music, and you can find bandsmen who have gone to some of literally the best music schools in the country, and they discovered that steady paycheck in the military, the benefits you get being a service member and stuff like that, it's a lot easier and a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for, a lot more dependable than trying to scare up gigs in the civilian world.
You're absolutely right, and I say that the military is actually the largest employer of professional musicians in the nation, and
I didn't know that.
Absolutely, and you're right that when you think of music and the military and credentialing and things like that, I'll correlate it like this: if you wanted to be a tanker in the Army or a bosun's mate in the Navy, you need no prior training to coming into service that way. They're going to provide that training for you. But in the military band system across all the services, you take an audition. There's a pretty vigorous screening process that happens ahead of time. And so you have to bring skills to the table up front, and then those things are honed and refined as you come to school and training. But you cannot just come in blank. You have to have a pretty standard set of skills coming in the door.
Sure. Now let's talk about your own journey again here for a moment. You're in the military musician program, music program. You're over at Little Creek. You're, working your way toward 20. At what point did you decide that when you got out of the Army that you're going to move into an education-related field and kind of pursue a career along that particular pathway versus going back to being a rock and roll musician full-time?
That's a great question. The reality is, at the time I was transitioning, this was, or considering it, 2010, 2012 arena of the world. And this was at the time where folks like Google and Microsoft and all these folks that wanted to be affiliated with the veteran service space were creating these amazing algorithms that said, hey, if you plug in your rate or you plug in your MOS, then we're going to tell you what you should do. Even the transition assistance programs, they tell you, hey, based on your MOS or your scores that you've got of this test, you're going to be X. And so I was offered three things that said, based on your MOS, you should be a musician, you should be a facilities person, or you should be a teacher. And I thought, well, hey, I've been instructing for several years as part of the Armed Forces School of Music. I thought, well, I have some of the credentials. I plugged my way through college, and I said, well, I guess I should be a teacher. And that's kind of what sparked not only interest long term, but it sort of propelled me into the space of education long term.
And I understand after you retired from the Army, you were actually a public school teacher for a while?
Sure was. I spent a few years as a local high school here in Hampton Roads and Virginia Beach as a band director. And I soon realized that as much as I loved that job and I was very interested in pursuing education more, I felt like there was I could have an influence at a higher level in our community.
Sure. And after that, you moved on to Regent University. You helped design their Veteran Center down there. Talk about that experience.
Absolutely. It's pretty rare in any space or world of profession where you're offered an opportunity to build something from scratch and given a fair amount of autonomy as well as a fair budget to get something like that done. And so I brought to the attention of the university that, hey, there's a need here for our students. At the time, we had about 1,500 military-affiliated students, and we said we need to be able to serve them in a way that's more meaningful and more tangible based on their unique benefits they bring as well as the unique challenges they have. And so we did a lot of research, met with and talked with a lot of great people across Hampton Roads community as well as the nation to say, how do we do this right? And ultimately, we stood up a military resource center that oversaw the entire life cycle of the student experience, from the time we would potentially recruit them across the country, all the way through serving them their advising, their benefits, their course scheduling, to tutoring and coaching, and then at the backside, once they graduate, ultimately with some sort of employment assistance.
Now, like a lot of schools out there in the military space, Regent, like Thomas Nelson, we're primarily serving our military students online. What do you think is really the key to being successful and successfully serving those military students in the online space?
There's several things that go into it, and I'm speaking to this from not only the recruitment and retention side, but also serving as faculty, understanding what those students bring to the table. Its accessibility has to be paramount, meaning that they have to be able to access the courses wherever they are in the world at any time, 24/7. Also, the accessibility of the facilitators or the professors. I think that's a big barrier that most students find, where the professor doesn't respond in a timely manner or things like that. They're just not accessible, both physically or mentally. And then lastly, it's how can the university or college create unique pathways in which for students to demonstrate content or knowledge or skill mastery. And so it's looking at that from the lens of, let's get creative when I work with students. If I have a student telling me, I just had a student just a few months ago, he was deployed downrange, and he couldn't connect regularly when we had synchronous activities. And he said, I don't think I can do the research needed for XYZ. And so we just came up with alternative solutions of how we could work together so he could say, yes, I'm engaged, I'm involved, and I've done the work. Let's just find a way to show that. I think those are the key elements to making online learning really impressive and important.
Now, after leaving Regent, you came to the USO. Tell us about what led to that transition and what the USO was looking for when they brought you on as their local director of the Pathfinder Transition Program.
Absolutely. You know, at some point when you're in this transition space, and I consider myself to still be in a sense of transition from military service into the civilian sector, even though it's been almost 10 years. But the reality is, I think people are easy to forget or forgive the why. Like, why is it that we do things? The fulfillment piece, and it's oftentimes you hear this conversation of like, hey, I want to make $200,000. I want to make $1 million. I want to be the CEO. It's like the material sort of look at it, whether it's financial need or want, if it's title need or want, and things like that. But they forget about the fulfillment. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And the USO presented an opportunity where I could bridge all of my wants, whys, passions, and desires all at the same time. So the thirst for continuing education for myself, and then passing that along to say, hey, how can I serve my community in a much bigger way? So community engagement was key to me. 2 was, how do we work together as a community to collaborate and then ultimately educate and transform the lives of our military and veteran and spouse population here in Hampton Roads? That's something that's near and dear to my heart. And to have those places where those things can all intersect provides a significant amount of fulfillment, knowing that my team is in the trenches doing the work to really help people through these transitions.
Let's talk about the Pathfinder program here for a moment. Now, the Pathfinder program is not new. It's been around now for about 4 or 5 years. You've been with the USO for a while now, running the program here in the local area. Give us kind of a summary or description of what the Pathfinder program is all about, who it is set up to serve, and what makes the Pathfinder program unique in the military transition arena.
Absolutely. So first thing is, as we've spoken before, when people think the USO, they think typically entertainment. They think the name Bob Hope. Right, and they think just entertainment, whether it's comics or concerts or entertainers across the world, and that's something that is a staple of USO and will continue to be. Another one they think of is this, they say the word airport. So it's the place we go, we kick up our feet, we get some snacks, we plug into Wi-Fi, we play some video games, take a nap, whatever that is. And it's a way that the USO provides a service to say, hey, let us just take care of you for the few minutes that you need some respite. And those two things will continue to be staples of the USO, hopefully indefinitely. But the USO Transition Program is here to provide a service in a way, I call it like the sifting of the mass amounts of information and resources that are out there and that are available to this community. Upwards of today, there's about 50,000 veteran service organizations in the country. And we're trying to say, hey, and most of those are amazing. They're trying to do amazing things, but it becomes overwhelming to people. And it becomes this just sea of information where we're constantly drinking water from the fire hose. And the USO transition program is here to say, let's sit down with you, figure out exactly what your goals are in life, and whether that's going to fall into typically one of 5 buckets or more. It'll be employment, it's education, it's VA benefits, it's financial readiness, and then mentorship. So we sit down, we work with you one-on-one. Our transition specialists, they will walk in this journey with you, and then they're going to sift through the 50,000 resources that are out there and provide the 1 or 2 that are going to be the most relevant based on your goals, and they're going to make sure that we're doing those warm handoffs. So it's more than just go to this website and check it out. It's call person X, here's the email, here's the phone number, they're expecting your call. This is going to help you achieve this goal in one of those buckets.
Yeah, I think we should point out, too, that, your service at Pathfinder, it's not just limited to folks who are leaving active duty, but you also serve the National Guard, Reserve, and military spouses, because, again, whether you're active duty, whether you're Guard, Reserve, we all hang up the uniform at some point, and you can benefit from the transition services that Pathfinder has to offer. And for the spouse side of things, obviously nowadays most military members are married, and they have wife, kids, and so transition is really a family process, and it's something the spouse has got to make that adjustment as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to realize, and I love what you said, like it's a family conversation, it's a family process. What we've seen in that space is that when working with a client, obviously we love to have family conversations because these are big decisions that are going to help you propel forward in your future. But the reality is that our military spouses often get overlooked in this space, and they have their own unique goals. So they may have goals and objectives that sort of are in concurrence with their spouse or the service member, but they have their own unique professional journeys and social goals and personal goals and academic goals. So we often see, as we work with our service members, that when their spouse joins the conversation, new conversations are striked up, and we say, hey, what is it that you need? And then they ultimately become a client on their own. So we work with the service member and spouses usually independently, because knowing that their journeys are connected, but they are different.
Yeah, it's a very important feature of your program. Now let's talk again about how people can avail themselves of Pathfinder. And before we even get into that, we talk about transition being a process that goes on for a period of time. At what point in a military career would you advise that service member to start thinking about transition and start taking some concrete steps so that you're not trying to get everything done at once when you're, less than 6 months away from your ETS date?
This is a great question. And this is one that I'm trying to change the narrative, not only in Hampton Roads, but this is a wicked problem across our nation. And I think that here in Hampton Roads, the collective energy and impact of our resources, we can be the solution. And I say that because transition should start from day one. And I'll tell this quick story about my very first unit in the Army. My commander, within the first couple of weeks, he calls me in his office and he says, hey, I need you to sign this form. And I didn't know what the form was. And I asked him, I said, hey, what's this form? He said, don't ask me questions. You just sign the form. So I said, yes, sir. I signed the form. It turned out to be an allotment form to have $25 a month come out of my paycheck to buy a $50 savings bond. And at the time, $25 in 1990 seemed like an awful lot coming out of an E2's paycheck. But I signed up for it. And what I didn't realize was that he was actually setting me up for some sense of financial wellness come 20, 30 years from that point. And honestly, I had forgotten about that allotment until the day I retired.
Wow.
And the transition officer said, hey, what are you going to do with this allotment? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And he said, well, you've had this savings bond allotment going for 22 years. What is it you're going to do with that? And so that was a 1-degree decision that I made at the very first week of my career, so to speak, that over the course of a year, I wouldn't really notice much different. But over the course of 20 years, that makes a significant impact in my transition or ability to do successfully at the backside. So we should start this transition conversation as early as possible. Typically, we see folks come to us around that 6-month to 12-month window. That's just what happens. I think that's just the narrative that we tell people. Part of it is because that's typically the 12-month is when they're They're right in that meaty zone for the transition assistance programs and things like that. But the reality is, if you remember these 5 major components that we try to focus on: employment, education, financial things. If you come to us 3 months before you get out, there's not a ton that we can do, especially like in financial readiness and education piece, that's going to impact you on the day you take that uniform 3 months later. Yes, we can give you some resources of how to move forward, but we want to have these conversations significantly earlier. So I'm trying to get people to really focus at that 2 to 4 year mark that's out, because then we can start working on the long range planning goals, whether it's education or financial readiness. And as that timeline starts moving toward the last day of service, we start moving things towards those tangible, like whether it's employment. I don't want you to start a resume 4 years out, because it hasn't finalized yet, and we're not even in a space where you could be even considering employment, things like that.
And when you're saying 2 to 4 years out, we're talking about really anybody in the military. It could be a first termer, could be somebody wrapping up 20 or 30 years of service. So even for that young person who came in, the military is not for me, or I just came in to get my education benefits, I'm counting it down now till I get out. Even for someone who is that young, that junior, it's very good to start thinking at a young age about, okay, what comes next and what steps I can take to make that transition process work better. And for somebody in that boat, because we have a lot of young first-term service members here in Hampton Roads that do get out after their initial enlistment, what kind of transition baby steps would you recommend for them as kind of, those first steps toward a successful transition from the military?
Absolutely. I think the first thing is to start thinking about what is it you want to be when you grow up. And it doesn't, and it sounds like conceptual and theoretical, and it's not very tangible, but the reality is, think of a cruise ship, right? If I want to change direction on a cruise ship, I'm not just spinning the wheel and making a 90-degree turn within a few minutes. It takes several miles to make a course correction. So when I start asking this question about what is it you want to be when you grow up, let's find a space in which we can start steering the ship in that direction. And so I usually start with folks, especially earlier on, with some sort of financial planning, in the sense of, let's think about what this is going to look like the day you take the uniform off and you no longer have this resource of revenue or funding for you. How are we going to replace that? What are you going to need moving forward that's going to fill that gap? Let's start working on a plan to do that now. The other thing is the education piece, because I'm a firm believer that most service members and military spouses offer amazing benefits to companies and organizations. And so finding a job, while it's a job in its own right, finding a job is not the hard part. It's finding the right job, or one that's a good fit for you. So I want to start working on the education piece that says, hey, if we have a general sense of what discipline or industry you would like to be in a few years from now, let's start looking at what type of credentials or badges or certifications are necessary, or that most people carry in that space, and let's start thinking about getting you into some of those, since those are much longer burn. And the other thing I would say is, initially, is this mentorship piece, is this, like, look for some coaches and mentors that will literally just give you some insight and feedback along the way. Like, sometimes brutally honest things is what we need to hear the most.
Sure.
And I think that's part of our responsibilities as folks in this transition space, whether we're in the education field or the employment sector or whatever, is like, let's I'm going to sit you down and find a way to show you, like, hey, you're going to do great things and amazing things. You're going to go change the world, but let's be realistic. Let's have a reasonable approach of how we're going to do this. And then together we can start coming up with a plan that's going to get you there.
We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Bob Habib of the USO Pathfinder Transition Program in a moment. But first, this reminder: make 2022 the year you start, continue, or finish your education. And at Thomas Nelson, we're more than ready to help you. We've been educating members of the military community for over 50 years. We have more than 80 degree and certificate programs. Many of them you can finish completely online, and we're affordable. If you're using tuition assistance, for example, you can receive a tuition discount no matter where you're stationed. And credits earned at TNCC will easily transfer to other colleges and universities. In fact, we have articulation agreements with more than 40 other institutions. Learn more about how we can help you achieve your educational goals. Visit tncc.edu/military. Or if you prefer, you can reach out to the team that handles active duty, Guard, and Reserve personnel and military spouses. Their number, 757-825-2938. And if you're using VA benefits, call 757-825-4075. Success. It's closer than you think at Thomas Nelson, Becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College. On that education piece, something we often hear from young service members is, hey, I've got my GI Bill benefits, and when I get out, I'm going to be a full-time student and focus on the education piece at that time. In the meantime, I'm going to do my military thing, have fun with my buddies, and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think that many of these young troops realize that, hey, first of all, GI Bill, 36 months. And once you start taking classes, the clock is ticking. So not unlimited benefits. And the other thing is they have got options while they're still in the military that they can use without touching that GI Bill. We're talking about tuition assistance. We're talking about now things like the Career Skills Program in the Army, Skill Bridge, and the other branches of service out there. Things they can do to improve themselves from a skills and educational perspective, and do that at basically no cost to themselves while they're still in uniform.
You bring up such an invaluable point. And the reality is, I think the last time I did research on this, approximately 40 to 50% of service members do not take advantage of the tuition assistance that are available, any type of education assistance programs that are available to them while they're serving. And that's astonishing to me. And I'll tell you this. So, and I'm not just throwing stones from my perspective. As a soldier, I didn't start going to school until about halfway through my career, until finally somebody, one of my mentors literally sat me down and said, what are you doing? Like, even if you're staying with this the long haul, you need to start thinking long term. And it really wasn't until I was about 10 years in, I was stationed in Europe, and my squad leader said, hey, you need to start knocking out some education. I didn't know what I wanted to do, where I was going, but he said, just start knocking out some of these general education requirements and things like that. And I said, sure. So I go to the education center, and the counselor there said, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. And she said, great, you're in a great position. Just start taking some basic courses, and as you do these things, you're going to gain some momentum. You'll start getting some success, and you're going to start developing a sense of what it is you're interested in, because you just don't know. And thankfully, because of those conversations, I just sort of jumped into this education field, and I started enjoying learning. I come from a background where I was a terrible high school student at best. So the thought of taking college courses was daunting to me, but I just needed an opportunity and a chance. And guess what? The funding was there. And I just tried, and I put in the effort. And over the years, I just started developing a sort of this thirst for learning. And it wasn't, and I wouldn't have been able to afford those things had it not been for tuition assistance and the other programs that availed to me through the military service. So my challenge, I guess, or my encouragement to any service member is don't ever leave benefits on the table. If there's something to be had, take advantage of it and do the work. Like, we're not going to do the homework for you, right? And the professors aren't going to do the reading for you, but they're there to guide you in your journey. Just meet them halfway. Just put in the work, and the benefits are there for you. You'll be amazed that once you start gaining some altitude and lift in your own academic journey, how much better you start feeling about your own development, and then you'll start finding pathways that you actually may be interested in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we see it all the time. Again, even for that young person that hasn't decided exactly what that final path is going to be, if you just start taking those general education classes, knocking out freshman composition, psychology, history classes, humanities, and yes, even the dreaded math class, you're going to be building a foundation for really any kind of degree that you could eventually acquire. And like you said, it builds self-confidence. It gives you skills and knowledge you can use on the job in your own life. And there's just, it's a multiplier effect. It really is.
You're right. And what's also interesting is that people ask me all the time, well, hey, if I'm going to get this degree, then what job can I get as a result of this degree? And those days are starting to close, meaning that the days of old where you had to have a very specific degree to get a very specific job, are they still out there? Yes, but in general, one of the biggest values of education is your demonstration of work ethic, your demonstration of being able to commit to something much larger than yourself, right? A long-term project. Those are all things that employers across every discipline, every sector are looking for. So the value of education spans way beyond just the nuts and bolts of the content that you're learning in the books.
Something else we need to point out, too, and we have mentioned this on the podcast on many occasions, education doesn't always equate to a college degree. We have got literally millions of jobs in America right now that are unfilled that require a degree of specialization and training beyond high school. But these jobs are going unfilled because we have a lot of young people that, I don't want to be a plumber. I don't want to be a welder. But the skilled trades are very much in demand. These are jobs that can't be sent overseas by and large. It can't be outsourced. They've got great pay, got great benefits. You're going to have a great career, be the foundation. Maybe if you're going into your own business someday, something like that. So I think we need to do a better job of pointing out that college degree, if it's maybe a good idea to take some college classes. I think that benefits everybody. But at the same time, your future may be in a job or career that doesn't take a 4-year degree. Maybe it doesn't even take an associate's degree, but takes that specialized training that gives you the skills that really lines you up for a very important and valuable and well-paying, rewarding job in fields, whether it's at trades, advanced manufacturing, something like that. And that's something I think we've also got to factor into the transition advising process.
You're absolutely right. And the reality is that, especially when you think of, like, one of the biggest trends right now is like in the world of cybersecurity, right? And yes, do colleges and universities offer degrees in cybersecurity? Absolutely, because that really gives you this firm foundation in which to go do great things. But the reality is, when you talk to employers, even some of the largest government employers, CISA, and these ones that are DISA and are in this world of cybersecurity infrastructure, we need experienced people, but we need certifications. We need industry standard certifications that are telling us that you know what's happening in the industry right now, and then you can apply that in your world right now. So you're exactly right. The formal college degree is an important piece of someone's portfolio from an academic and professional standpoint, but it's not the only piece. It is just one piece. And we go back to this mentorship piece. If I can link up with people in this field or into a specific organization that I'm interested in becoming a part of, I'm going to ask those questions like, hey, tell me how valuable getting a 4-year degree in cybersecurity is versus having like an AAS in general IT and then getting a few certifications in cybersecurity. Which one would you value more? And I bet people would be surprised with what they hear.
And of course, the other thing for transitioning military is finding the right way to highlight your military training, expertise, education that really relates to that job or that career you want to embark on. And cybersecurity is an excellent case in point, because the military has gone into cyber for obvious reasons in a big, big way. We've got literally thousands of cybersecurity experts in the military here in Hampton Roads. They've got a great foundation in terms of training. Many of them, most of them, the vast majority have a security clearance, which if you want to work for DOD or work for a defense contractor, that's something you've got to have. And if you've got it coming into the hiring interview, it gives you a leg up on the competition. So these are things, again, I think that, and I'm sure you do this as part of the Pathfinder program, is showing military members how to take that military experience, make it relevant for the civilian market to increase their hireability by a civilian employer.
Absolutely, especially if it's, and I'll go back to that conversation where, like, when you decide a pathway or at least a general direction of where you're going to head, if it's directly related to the job or the occupation field that you held in the military, then it's a matter of let's figure out how do we articulate this transferability of your skills and experiences into civilian jargon or civilian speak. On the flip side of that, there are still skills and competencies that you will take away. Like if you were a tanker and you wanted to go in the world of finance, many of those boots on the ground skills and competencies are not directly translatable to the world of finance, but some of those softer skills are for sure, whether it's management or leadership and things like that. So it's capturing that. How do we tailor our experience? How do we tailor the articulation of our experience into the world that we're headed into?
And I think you're raising a really good point there, because, let's face it, there are military jobs, MOSs, AFSCs, ratings out there that don't at first glance have a lot of direct applicability to the civilian world. But as you mentioned, military members by and large have the soft skills. They have the leadership skills. They have the ability to take detailed instructions and act or execute upon that. Things, again, that can serve you well in a variety of civilian careers that, again, you can bring out on your resume as part of the hiring process, and maybe that'll make up for a perceived gap in terms of your education, credentials, and things like that.
It certainly could, because those are universally applied skills and competencies that every organization is looking for. Now, I will say this, right? As part of our approach to working with our clients is too, we also want to keep people grounded, right, and realistic in what their expectations are. So I say that in the sense of, if someone wants to really, we'll go back to cybersecurity, if they want to live in the cybersecurity world as a civilian, but they have no experience whatsoever, they have no credentials, no training at all, just an interest, that's a good place to start, because now we know what we have to get in the door. I'm going to be realistic with this person and say, hey, we can tailor your resume that focuses on the soft skills and some of the things that are universally applied, but there's very little substitution for industry standard knowledge and industry standard experience of that, because that's the stuff that's directly correlated. So it's both. Well, we have to find a way to capture the things that are transferable in a universal way, and then find ways to create a pathway forward to fill in those gaps.
Let's talk about resumes for a second, because you bring up some really, really good points there. I think we in the military, former military, retirees, whatever, vets, we're guilty sometimes of, you hear this thing about, you hand a hiring manager a resume that's literally filled with military jargon. Makes perfect sense to you because you spent 20, 30 years learning all this stuff, but the guy across the table or the lady across the table, even in a place like Hampton Roads, he or she may have never spent a single day in uniform, and all these acronyms you're throwing at them mean absolutely nothing. So as part of that resume, take us through, if you would, the resume preparation process that you use as part of Pathfinder.
Great question, and totally agree. So as a hiring manager in previous positions, I saw this all the time, is that veterans would take themselves out of the running because they just weren't savvy in communicating the skills and competencies they had. I remember my boss asked me one time, like, hey, this person says they're a command sergeant major. Is that good? Because she didn't know. And it wasn't anything against her. She had no idea. And so once I explained, hey, typically the scope of this person would likely be this, that shed some light, but it didn't come across that way. So you're right. It's first thing we try to do is let's get rid of as much military jargon as humanly possible. Let's get rid of all of the fancy acronyms and things like that. And even there's this conversation about, well, should military awards go on there and military accolades and all those things. And we can talk days and days on those things. But the reality is your resume has to be tailored to the opportunity in which you are seeking, in which you're applying. And the word matters. Wordsmithing is really important with this concept. So we sort of look through that process. We look at how do we capture a hiring manager's attention based on what it is you're bringing to the table. And there's two basic approaches that we look at. One is the chronological, right, where you're saying, hey, over the past 20 years or 4 years or whatever that looks like, here's these jobs, and maybe they're military assignments, and this was the title or this is the scope, and then you have some bullets that are sort of coinciding with those things. What that does is that highlights where your experience came from. What I prefer, and many hiring managers also prefer this, is a skills or a competency-based resume, where instead of saying a list of chronological what has happened, I'm going to say, based on your job description or your position description that you've posted, it seems to me that you're looking for managerial skills, you're looking for someone that understands data, and then someone understands training and development. So those are the three categories I'm going to put on my resume. So management, and I'm going to list 3 or 4 bullets that I have experience in and how they resulted in something under this management bucket. Then I'm going to do the same thing for training and development, and then the same thing for X. And so at the end, now I'm highlighting these 3 or 4 major components of that job and like return on investment, ROI bullets that speak into that specifically. And at the end, I'll just put a listing of my employment history. So that way I'm sort of capturing the focus on the skills and competencies that are needed for the job, not necessarily where they came from.
And you're also showing that you've applied these skills and competencies in a succession of jobs that in a typical military career have resulted in more and more responsibility as you reach higher in rank. Quick question on resumes here following up. How long on average does it take a military member to produce a really good resume, one that is going to be short, succinct, captures the skills, captures the military work history, and will really help them shine in front of a civilian hiring manager?
I'd say, based on my experience, typically a couple of months.
Yeah.
So this is not something that you're going to do overnight.
Yeah.
You do have the anomalies, but it takes time. And I think the biggest mistake that we see is that someone says, hey, here's my resume, take a look at it. And the first question I ask them is, well, what's the job you're applying for? Because I have no comparative model in which to say this would be, this would lend, beneficial to you by submitting this, because I don't know what the standard is you're up against. And so we do this to ourselves as job seekers, especially veterans, is we create this master resume, which you should do as a place to just literally yank bullets out for specific resumes. But then we end up submitting that master resume to people. And that's a failure, I think, on many parts, because it's just like this throwing as much information out there to see what will stick, and it's not being tailored towards anything specific.
Getting back to the Pathfinder program here a moment ago, we were talking about how do folks go about making contact with you, and how exactly do they sign up for Pathfinder? And once they sign up, we talked earlier about, the 5 major areas that you help people with. What are some things they can expect to receive as part of the Pathfinder program?
Okay. So the first thing I would encourage everyone to do is at least just do some research. Right? So again, I've mentioned that we're here to help sift through the myriad of resources, and given that the USO brand is a trusted brand, and that we're here to help you sift through those myriad of resources, you can go at any time to our website, which is uso.org/transition. And that gives a pretty detailed flesh out of what the program is. It gives you also some links to some upcoming webinars and seminars that we offer free to anybody that's interested. And then it also provides you an opportunity to connect directly with our transition specialist. Once you directly connect with us, you then become a client. And as a client, the process is very simple, but it's very, very relevant to your journey. So we will sit down with you either face-to-face or virtual, and we're going to just have a conversation just like the one that's happening today. We're going to talk about what are your goals and dreams, what are some of the things you'd love to do, what are the things you don't want to do. Questions like very pointed, how much money do you think you want to make, how much money do you need to make, what is it what is your purpose, and let's figure those things out. Once we have a good idea of what direction we're going to head, and it doesn't have to be like it's not set in stone, but the general direction, we then create an action plan for you. And in that action plan, we're going to give you a few what we call tasks. And I know you're thinking, I don't need any more tasks, I'm in the military. But the reality is we're providing you tangible steps in which to say, I want to achieve goal X. So if it's you're in a window where we think interviewing and resumes are going to be helpful to you in the next 3 months, we're going to ensure that we're going to work with you directly. And then if you need some assistance with your resume, we're going to tag you up with a specific partner that's going to sit down with you and do the same exact thing, give you that one-on-one sort of a red carpet approach to saying this is not a one-size-fits-all. So we're going to work with you in all those buckets, and it could be one of those buckets or all 5. And then we're going to create this plan for you. Once the plan is created, you'll have access to those resources 24/7 in our USO app. You'll download the app, and through the app, you'll see these action plans that we've put in place for you. You'll be able to see your percentage toward completion on those things. It's kind of almost like a project management tool. You'll be able to communicate directly through text, through chat, through email, and call right through the app. And the last thing I'll mention from the app is it's evergreen. So once let's say we fast forward 6 months and you've transitioned successfully, or you've taken advantage of the resources we've provided you, those resources will stay in that app as long as you have that app. So you'll have access to them if you want to refer back to them. And we find here, especially in Hampton Roads, Hampton Roads, we realize, may not be your final destination when you transfer out. And so we say, great, let's start working with you because we have a really good sense of what resources are best to suit you here in Hampton Roads. But then you move to Texas or Florida or Guam or Puerto Rico or even Europe. We then transfer your case to a team in that region because they have the eyes on the ground of what's the best available resource for you in that area. And then your client sort of journey will continue on wherever you land. And then at some point, you'll no longer be a client because you'll have taken advantage of the resources that we've offered. So it's evergreen and it goes with you wherever you go.
And that's a really valuable service because we have data that shows that roughly, especially among our junior service members, about 70% leave Virginia and leave Hampton Roads once they separate from the military. So being able, as you point out, to hand off their case to a service organization, the whole USO chapter in Texas or Utah, California, overseas, that's a really, really valuable service so they don't lose the support that they've been getting once they leave the military. And we should point out, too, that you do provide support after people actually hang up the uniform. So it's not something that's going to take them right up to that ETS date and then, okay, done with the military, done with us, you keep providing support after they actually leave the military.
Absolutely. So we pride ourselves in that transition, know that it's not just simple and like your end of service date comes and that's it. Typically, we'll work with clients between 3 and 6 months after their transition date. So it's kind of like, let's see what happens when the dust settles. And if there's something new that comes to the table, we'll certainly work with you after that post-transition.
I was looking through some material you guys have on your website here locally, and I'll give you a chance to give the website here in a moment. But you also have various information sessions, webinars, things like that focus on topics that are of specific interest to the military member, especially those transitioning. Talk about some of those and what's coming up on the calendar.
Absolutely. And again, these are we structured these webinars and seminars based on the feedback that we receive from our clients. And typically, the ones that are most popular, we have one that's hosted by Michael Quinn. He's a ninja on all things LinkedIn, like professional branding, personal branding. That's one of the ones that's most common. We have one of those coming up in the coming weeks. Another one that's really one that's well attended is our federal resume workshop, where it's how do we navigate all things USA jobs in the government sector, and what does that look like, and how does that differ from the private sector and things like that. That we have one of those coming up here shortly. I guess another one I'll highlight is we call like kickstart to education. So it's really answering these questions we were discussing, like what if I determine I need some form of education to get into field X or discipline Y. How do I do it? How do I get started? Where do I start from? And so we sort of capture those things. And the best way to find out about those webinars and seminars is simply just go to the Transitions website, and there's a complete listing as well as registration information.
Outstanding. And again, how, for someone who would like to become involved with and sign up for the USO Pathfinder Transition Program, what's the best way they can do that?
Absolutely. The best way here, anywhere across the globe, is to go to www.uso.org/transition. Again, that's uso.org/transition. And that's where you'll have the myriad of information you'll need in a very clear way. And then the most important bucket is there's a little button that says connect with the transition specialist. And when you hit that, it'll just ask you for some basic information, and we will respond to you within 24 hours, and off we go, start building that pathway for you.
We should point out, too, the services provided by the USO are absolutely free. So you're getting help across a variety of areas that will be of interest to you during the transition process, getting it from an organization that, again, has been supporting the military community for more than 80 years now, and again, having a tailored, individualized program that you can use to make that transition process. And for folks, Bob, that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to contact you locally?
The best way, so I will give you my email address, which is rhabib, RHABIB, @uso.org. And then also, I would just encourage you to link up with me on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find. There aren't too many Dr. Bob Habibs out there. Just search on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with you. And once you connect with me, you're basically inherently connected with my team, and you'll see we typically put out a lot of our resources through LinkedIn and other portals.
Again, that's great information from a great program, great organization. Bob, thank you so much again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Gary, thank you so much for your time and everything that you do for our service in our community.
And we've been talking with Dr. Bob Habib. He is the transition manager for the USO of Hampton Roads in Central Virginia. Should also point out he is a professor for the School of Business and Leadership at Regent University, a guy that has been very active in helping service members in the transition process for a number of years now. He and the USO Pathfinder Program, a great, great resource for service members, for military spouses who are making that transition to civilian life. If you're in that category, we certainly encourage you to contact Bob, contact the USO, and find out what Pathfinder can do for you. This has been At Ease, the military podcast of Thomas Nelson Community College. I'm Gary Pounder. Thanks for listening.